Hello and welcome to this tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to make this drum loop. Let's start by creating a new live set by pressing Ctrl N. Delete these default tracks with the delete key. Switch to arrangement view by pressing the tab key. On the left side of the screen is Ableton's browser. And here are the samples I want to use. Change the tempo to 86 BPM, and now I can drag in the drum samples. I made all of these samples previously in a dedicated sound design session. You can download all of the samples, including the whole loop and the project file, for free. Check out the link in the description box below. Now I can select an area here and press Alt-L to loop it and drag in the percussion loop. Let's copy this kick and drag in some kick ghost notes. I made these ghost notes from the original kick sample. If you have only one kick sample and you want to create some variety, you can use the following technique. Just copy the original sample over here. Use Z to zoom in and remove the beginning by dragging the left edge of the sample to the right. Make sure the new sample start point is close to a zero crossing of the waveform, and use a small fade in to avoid clicks. The more you remove the transient, the softer it will sound. Let's put a fade here as well to avoid clicks. Let's turn off the grid with Ctrl 4 so you can move the samples around freely. This way I can make the loop sound more groovy and organic. Next, I'm adding two more audio tracks by pressing Ctrl T twice. Let's drag in these Foley samples. There's some vinyl and crackling noises to layer on top of the snare to make it sound a little more interesting. Again, don't be concerned about locking everything to the grid perfectly. We want these little inaccuracies to make it sound more natural. When I make drums, I always turn off the grid. The only sample I put on the grid is the first kick in the first bar of my loop. Put a limiter on the master just to make sure nothing clips. Now it's time to put some insert effects on our drum tracks. Let's find the EQ8 here and drag it to the kick track. I'm going to group this into an audio effect rack by pressing Ctrl G. Now click on the chains list. I want to do some parallel EQing, so I'm going to add another empty chain with no effects on it by right-clicking and choosing Create Chain. Go back to the original chain with the EQ on it. Solo the EQ chain and reduce the gain. Make a low cut here, boost some of the high frequencies and finish it with a high cut. I bandpass the signal like that to make sure there's no unwanted frequency content in the extreme lows and highs. Next, I'm going to add a glue compressor to make it a little louder. Set the attack to 30 milliseconds so the transients of the kick can go through. Set the release to auto and the ratio to 10. Lower the threshold and increase the gain. Next, we're going to add Ableton's saturator. Drive it by 6 dB. Put the bass to -36 to avoid distorting the low frequencies. I'm going to decrease the gain of the dry chain and put an EQ on it as well, just to bandpass it. Now let's continue with the snare. Put an EQ on here as well. Group it, create a parallel chain. Decrease the gains. Low cut. I'm trying to emphasize the crack of the snare here. The snare sample is a rim click, so it doesn't have the typical snare bottom at around 200 Hz. Instead, I'm trying to emphasize the rim click sound at around 1 kHz. Boost the highs and high cut the signal. Low cut at around 80 Hz this time. This is our basic EQing setup for the snare. Compress it again with the glue compressor. Attack to 30 milliseconds. Release quite fast to 0.1 milliseconds. Ratio to 10. Lower threshold. Increase the gain. There's some clipping, but that's okay. Add a touch of saturation and put a limiter after the effects rack to limit the whole snare track. Again, I also low cut the dry signal. A little bit of tweaking and you're good to go. Next, I'll add a touch of reverb to the snare. I use FabFilter's Pro R for this, but you can use any other reverb. Low cut it. Decrease reverb time. Decrease mix percentage. It's just a little touch, but it makes a big difference in combination with all other elements. Next, I'm low cutting the snare layers. Put an EQ on both snare layer tracks and low cut them quite heavily. We don't want any of the low frequency content from these layers in our mix. It's a good rule of thumb in general when you're mixing to make room for the kick and bass in the lower frequencies. Let's move to the percussion loop. I also made this loop earlier from one-shot samples and Superior Drummer, which I highly recommend, especially for layering acoustic samples with electronic drum sounds. Let's low cut this again. There is some tonal frequency content in this loop at around 1 kHz. We could specifically eliminate these frequencies, but it's not that big of a deal in this case, so I'm just going to low cut the loop and leave it as it is. Now I'm going to group all of the drum tracks together by selecting them and pressing Ctrl G. By grouping the tracks, I can process everything simultaneously to make the whole loop sound better, louder, and glue the elements together. Let's pull down the faders so we have some more headroom for the group effects. Start with an EQ again, make a low cut. I'm also boosting the low mids of the whole loop, which affects the snare and the overall sound as well. I'd often like to remove some of the woody sound at around 350 Hz. Let's also boost the highs and high cut the whole loop at around 18 kHz. Now let me A/B this. Makes the loop sound less flat and gives it a bit more depth. Now I'm gonna add isotope alloy. Add a slight touch of distortion from the alloy exciter. Leave the mix at 100% and increase the drive until it's a bit too much, and then decrease the mix percentage to use it in parallel mode. Let's switch to the transient tab and increase the attack. I could use the multiband function here, but for such a simple loop this will do just fine. Let me close this and add another glue compressor to compress and glue the sounds together. It works quite well, but you could just as well use any other compressor plugin. Again, let the transients go through, release on auto, ratio to 10, threshold to around -30, and some gain to make up for the lost loudness. Group the effects into a rag with Ctrl G. Create an empty parallel chain. Bandpass the dry signal and decrease the gains so that the whole insert effect chain we created works in parallel with the dry chain, just as we did previously with the individual tracks. Let's add some fades to the kick ghost notes. I could also add a touch of reverb to the drum group. Decrease the reverb time, low cut it. Decrease the mix percentage. Now I want to add some more percussive elements to spice up the loop by creating a triplet pattern which contrasts the other elements rhythmically. So let's drag these in. Sounds terrible. I'm going to tweak the pattern later. Let me quickly show you how I made these. It's really simple. I'm going to use Operator, which is one of Ableton's synthesizers which supports FM synthesis. Just drag an operator into the project. Select an area in the track and press Ctrl-Shift-M to create a MIDI clip on the selected track. Press B to enter draw mode and create a very low MIDI note, like a C0 for example. Let's drag this out to make it longer. Right now this is just a sine wave. To create the click sound we want, we head over to the operator instance and bring down the sustain to -infinity like that. Now I change the loop mode to beat and leave repeat at a 16th note. If you want to, you can add a pitch envelope, but it will only affect the first note anyways. To do this, increase the initial parameter to +48 semitones and decrease the decay rate. Let's resample that and then cut the individual clicks. Add another EQ to low cut the sample, and what you end up with is quite similar to the clicks we've imported previously. Back to tweaking our click pattern. I'm going to add another EQ here to get rid of the low end, just like I did before. Next, I'm going to create a fake stereo effect by using a delay to offset the signal by a couple of milliseconds on one channel, but leave the other channel unaffected. I'm not happy yet with how the kick drum sits in the mix, so I'm going to try and tweak that a bit more. The transients of these drum samples are pretty soft, and that's fine for this kind of loop. But still, the kick could use more presence and bottom end. Tweak the parameters until you're satisfied. Okay, so I'm done tweaking and the loop now sounds like this. I have added some more compression, gave the kick more punch, changed levels and so on. Just some more trial and error. I also often use the save as function to save different versions of the project at different stages. That way, if I fuck up a mix, I can always revert back to previous versions without losing anything. Okay, I'm happy with the loop at that stage. Of course, there's always room for improvement. But let's resample this. Create a new audio track with Ctrl-T. Pull it down so it sits outside of the drum group. Set the input to resampling. Make sure there is a limiter on the master so nothing clips. And record on the resampling track. I activate punch in and punch out and deactivate the loop cycle function, so it just records the area between the in and out marker once. Select the resampling track and press F9 to record, or use the record button here at the top. The loop has now been resampled and I'm ready to copy it into my sample library. I highly recommend to copy all sounds you make in these sound design sessions to a dedicated sample folder for later use. Let's move this loop over here. Zoom in with Z, loop it with Alt-L, and listen to it again to make sure everything sounds as it's supposed to. Give the clip a name. If you click on the sample name right next to the clip name, it shows you the sample location on your hard drive. Press Ctrl-R and copy and paste the clip name. Now I can just drag the sample while holding Ctrl to copy it into my sample library. There you go. This concludes our tutorial. If you liked it, smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. As I mentioned, there's a link in the description box in case you want to download the project file and all the samples I used. And please let me know in the comments what kind of tutorial videos you'd like to see in the future. Thanks for watching and see you in the next tutorial.